Hello, data science students. I hope you're all doing well, staying happy, healthy, and safe. And today we're going to be talking about nearest neighbor approximation. So moving right along with that, there we go. For your next assignment, the one that's going to be dealing with this topic, make sure that you have at least Python version 2.7.3 and 2.7.13 installed. Officially for the class, we're using Python 3, but for those of you who've been stragglers and using 2.7, I haven't really complained. And I'm not going to complain as long as you get your assignments working. But for this one, you're going to need to make sure that you've got 2.7.13 installed. So I usually want to do this in person. I poll the class and say, does anyone know who this guy is? Well, this guy is one of the first pop scientists that was like sort of a household name, you know. His name is Carl Sagan. He was a physicist, a philosopher, an author, many things. Sort of a Renaissance man of his time. And one of the things that he's well known for is his work on the Voyager space probe project with NASA. One of the things that he was in particular in charge of with this was the creation of the famous Voyager golden record. So when we sent Voyager out into the unknowns, we knew it was never coming back. Eventually, it was going to leave our solar system and enter interstellar space, and now it has. It's been sort of a joke over my lifetime that Voyager keeps leaving the solar system over and over. Because growing up, every few years there would be a newspaper article that said Voyager is leaving our solar system, and then a few months later, the data coming from Voyager revised our definition of the boundary of the solar system. So it was back in our solar system again. This time, pretty darn sure we have now escaped our solar system and are in interstellar space. But one of the things Sagan was really interested in was the fact that this was going to be our ambassador to the rest of the universe. The first human made object to leave our solar system would be Voyager, and they wanted to put on it something that was a echo of humanity, a representation. And this was the golden record. It has a lot of stuff on it. It has uh, a map of our solar system, a bunch of other information. But one of the interesting things is the recording itself. It has various music from different places across Earth. It has the voices of children in different languages saying hello. And it even has some physiological information. It has the recording of a human heart. And the human heart that was recorded was Carl Sagan's partner on this project, Andrean. Now, Andrean and Carl Sagan eventually got married. And while they were working on the project together, they were falling in love, but they never talked about it. And eventually they did, and they got married and those kind of things. But Andrean talking about having the sound of her heart recorded for the Voyager record, she said what was on her mind at the time was Carl, and so it was the sound of a heart in love that was on the golden record. And I think that it's somewhat beautiful and poetic that humanity's first message out into the cosmos, was in fact, a message of love. It's just a little bit of beauty there. But I digress a bit. One of the cool things that came from the Voyager program, and one of the many cool things. This is just one of like a trillion. Uh, is this photo right here? This photo is sometimes referred to as the pale blue dot or the dust in a beam of sunlight. Uh, but when Voyager was out quite far from Earth, leaving the solar system, Sagan asked NASA, turn the cameras around and take a picture of Earth. They're like, why would we want to do that? That doesn't make any sense. You can't see Earth. It'll just be like just a little blue speck, in the image. He's like, no, trust me. It'll be the most amazing picture we'll ever take. And he was right. This pale blue dot, dust caught in a sunbeam, is Earth, the entire planet. Up to the moment this photo was taken, every human being who had ever lived, died, loved, lost, lived, existed on that dot. All of us, everyone. Now, we can't tell a lot from just looking at that dot, except from the context of what's around it. Empty space. We're very, very small. Our beautiful, wonderful, large planet is in interstellar terms a speck of dust at best. So even though we couldn't get any information so much about Earth itself from this picture, we got information about the context of Earth with regard to the things around it. And that's sort of the theme of today's talk. Here's another famous photograph. It's called typically referred to as Earthrise. This is a beautiful, beautiful photo taken from the surface of the moon, showing our beautiful blue marble. Now we can get some information about our planet by looking at this. We see white fluffy clouds. We see some land masses, just a little bit actually, but we see a lot of blue. So we understand there's a lot of water here. So we're getting more information than we were from the pale blue dot, but still we can't tell a whole heck of a lot about what we're looking at. But if we zoom in further, this is one of my favorite photos, like of all time, because there's so much data encapsulated in this image. This is a picture of the United States at night. The light sources across the United States. Now, this isn't, in fairness, all fairness, this isn't a single shot. This is composed of multiple satellite images, I believe, but still absolutely gorgeous. And you can tell so much about the continental U.S. just by looking at this picture, and only looking at light. That's the beauty of it. We're only looking at light sources at night. Looking at this, we can see a ton of stuff. We see big blobs that correspond to where cities are located. We see beautiful highlights around the edges of the coast. So these are places where there's higher activity. There's more people. So the more light, generally, the more people. So we can see that people congregate in these city areas, but also congregate around coastal regions, and it makes sense, because there's going to be a lot of trade. There's going to be ports and goods coming in. This is how they get to the rest of our country. Another really, really fascinating thing is by just looking at the specs on this, we can figure out maps of highways and roadways in the United States. Notice that these dots all kind of follow little grids, little lines, and each of these big dots here, these cities, have little tendrils that stretch out, weaving their way sort of root-like out to other larger dots. These show us the roadways in the United States. And each of these slightly larger dots here, represents another town, another small city. And if you're into biology, you're probably aware of like putting samples in petri dishes and watching things grow. Well, things tend to grow out from a source, and you can actually see that here in the United States. So if we look at the East Coast, we see that the most of the lights are actually concentrated there and slowly spread out west until we hit our outlier regions along the coast, where there's always going to be more, activity. And so a bit of the U.S. history is encoded just in the lights that we see at night. Absolutely beautiful. And moving along, if it'll progress to the next slide. Come on. Please, computer. I want to see the next slide. We're running out of time. Come on. I clicked. Help me out, little guy. Hey, that's too far. It advanced way too far. There we go. If we zoom in a little bit further to this map of sort of like the 5-state area around Mississippi, we see different information. It's on a more zoomed in scale, but we can see some geographic features. We see the Mississippi River, its delta. We see some other features up here, but all in all, we can see it's really green, and we have some sandy-looking places along the coast where we can assume are beaches. Uh, yeah, we can get a good bit of information from this, but we're not getting a huge amount of detail at this scale. So one of the important things to understand when looking at data is sometimes looking at it at different scales, whether larger or smaller, can be more informative than others. If we zoom in a little bit further to our specific area, come on, slide. I told you to advance. You can do it. You can do it. Are you going to do it? You're not going to do it. Okay. So let's try one more time. Come on. There we are. Okay. So it is hard to control the slides. Okay. Really? Okay. So if we can get it to back up a bit. And we look at this map of campus, we can see a lot of information. Suddenly zooming in a little bit further has given us a huge amount of detail. Now, what we can see is we can see roadways, all of which sort of circling around campus, but all of which also intertwining with campus. So we know that the campus is highly connected to the surrounding community. We can see other information. We can see sporting areas. We can see tennis courts here. We can see tennis courts up there, football stadiums, baseball diamonds, all sorts of things. And we can see areas that are largely wooded. We also see areas that are partially wooded with structures. These are residential areas, so we can figure out where people are living. Then we get to areas like this, where there's not a lot of vegetation, but lots and lots of buildings in regular patterns, almost grid-like. So this is getting into the downtown area, so a place that's not primarily residential, but more business focused. And then up here at the top, we can see things like mixture of buildings and vegetation again, more residential areas. So we keep getting different levels of information as we zoom in further and further. Now, zooming in even further. Now, in all fairness, this actually isn't from Oxford. This is, I think I got this from Wikipedia, but a very, very cool picture nonetheless. What we have here is a fairly uniform looking community, but if we look closer, we can figure out some information about the people that live in this community. First of all, on average, people spend about 30% of their income on housing. This is a pretty solid average. So if we look at the houses, we see there's actually two kinds of houses here. Up at the top, we have what look like single-family homes. So for each building, it's a single housing unit. However, if we look at this row right here, we see that every building is actually two housing units. So we can assume that with a fair bit of certainty that these are probably more expensive houses here, and these are probably less expensive. Now, based on that 30% average, we can say that these people probably make, on average, a lower income than the people up here. Also, just looking at the distribution of vehicles, typically in a household, you're not going to have more than one vehicle per person. So, because you can't drive two at once unless you're like really lucky. Anyway, but if we look here and we count the number of houses or a number of structures that have vehicles in front of them, there's 9 of them. And 2 times 9, that's 18 housing units. And turns out there are 18 vehicles here, averages out to about 1 vehicle per house. So we can say that at a bare minimum, there's probably 1 person living in each of these guys. Similarly, up here, I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but it averages out to about 1.5 cars per house. So these are probably multi-person homes up here. There's probably a minimum of 2 people in the vast majority of the houses at the top. And granted, this hasn't told us anything about any individual household, but it's given us a great deal of information about the community. On average, how many people lives in the homes, and on average, probably about how much the income is. So if you could find houses listed for sale in these areas, you could then estimate the approximate income for that neighborhood. But there's a weakness. We can only approximate so far. So let's say we picked this house and we wanted to know specifically about the people living in that home based on the neighborhood. We wouldn't be able to tell very much. We wouldn't be able to tell, if it was the retiree or the young family or the well-read college professor, so to speak. Uh, yeah, we can't get that information by looking at the community. We could tell a lot on average about the people living in this home, but when it comes to specific details, we really can't tell too much. And this all goes back to what we talked about earlier in the semester, that descriptive statistics aren't about describing individuals. It's about describing populations, groups of individuals, groups of samples. And the same is true for nearest neighbor approximation. It's a way of giving us a good guess about the characteristics of an area or characteristics of a population, but it's solely an approximation. It's going to be very undescriptive of an individual, even if it is highly descriptive of a community. Again, on average. Okay, advance slide. Come on. Come on. You can do it. I feel like I'm back when I was teaching my baby to walk. It's like, come on, you can walk, take that step, flip the slide, come on. There we go. So nearest neighbor approximation is actually used fairly frequently. Pretty much any kind of map that you've seen that looks like this is based on nearest neighbor approximation, because in reality, we can't measure the responses or thoughts or opinions of every single individual in the community or even the state or nation or world or whatever that we're wanting to look at. So what we have to do is we have to rely on aggregate information. So we can't tell anything about these particular individuals, but by looking at their surrounding community, we can make a good guess about their characteristics. Similarly, we might have, grab the slides. I'm sorry about that. There we go. Similarly, we might not be able to tell much about this county or that county or the other county, but by looking at the surrounding counties, we could make an approximation of whatever information that we're wanting to derive from the surrounding counties to describe the data that's missing. And every geopolitical map of the U.S. associated with some voting or whatnot has been derived almost almost entirely from this kind of approximation. Uh, Drawing broad conclusions about a population based on samples taken from within that population. And so the assignment that you're going to be given for this class, I think this is going to be a challenge number 4, if I'm counting up properly, is you're going to be given some data, some sparse data within the United States, and then you're going to be asked to construct a complete map of that data using nearest neighbor approximation. Typically, this is referred to as K nearest neighbor approximation, where K is a variable defining how many neighbors you're going to look at. So K can be looking at the nearest 3 neighbors, nearest 5 neighbors, something like that. So in that case, let's say we wanted to approximate the value at this location. We would find the 3 points of data that we actually have that are closest to it, and then average those together, and then replace the missing data with the average of the 3 closest. And so this is actually one of the examples, or one of the data sets we worked with in a previous class. I think this was a study originally done by like North Carolina State University or something like that. I'm not 100% sure. But looking at the geographic correlation with the use of the words soda, pop, Coke, and soft drink to describe a cold, sugary, carbonated beverage. And let me adjust my position here just a little bit. There we go. Okay. And so looking here, you can see that, these regions are heavy on using soda to describe a cola-like beverage, while these regions here tend to use the word pop, and then yellow. It's just yellow is pretty sparse through here for soft drink. Now, the one that I want to point at though is Coke. Uh, I was born and raised in this area here, and I swear I have never used Coke to describe a beverage other than Coca-Cola. And a lot of the people I talk to, same way. So it's really, I find this very, very curious. Another example we used was the burger franchise map. So I actually let the class pick this topic that year, and someone suggested finding out where Carl's Jr. turns into Hardee's. So if you don't know, Carl's Jr. and Hardee's are the same restaurant. They're just named differently depending on where you live in the United States. But I threw in In-N-Out and miscellaneous others. And what we see when we do our filling in of the data here, and this is based off of maybe 100 or so franchise locations across the United States, we see a hard line that defines what I like to call the Carl's Hardee's line across the United States. Essentially, once you get past this line through the Midwest, you're going to be in Carl's Jr. territory. And In-N-Out is sort of spread out around these areas as well. But yeah, there's definitely a hard line here for what delineates where you'll find a Carl's Jr.'s versus a Hardee's. So the data that you're going to be using is actually from the U.S. Census, and it's going to be domestic migration data. So looking at the change in population across the United States from one year to the next. So negative values indicate a decrease in population, meaning more people moved out of that area than moved into the area. And a positive value is going to indicate more people entering that area than leaving. And values close to zero means the population stayed fairly stable. So your task is to do a reconstruction very similar to this. I'll be posting this on Blackboard fairly soon. And in the meantime, if you guys have any questions, feel free to catch me during my virtual office hours, which I'm going to be emailing out soon, or sending me an email. And with that, I hope you're all doing well, and I will see you virtually soon. Thank you very much.